Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And the 2044 to 2045 offseason is getting underway today. But before we start moving forward in the game, I'm going to take some time to look at the past with some of our former players and also look at the future with some of the top prospects in our organization and around the league. We talked a lot in the last episode when we did our annual roster review about the difficult salary situation we are in for next season. Right now we have about $195 million potentially on the books if we try to pay all of our arbitration eligible players. And unfortunately, that will not work very well in the context of a $200 million budget. You can see right now we are tied for 26th in terms of our budget. We are 8th in terms of our player payroll, and that puts us at $21 million in the hole, even with scouting and player development pared down to pretty insubstantial amounts. So we have been thinking a lot offline about which direction to go with the three highest paid arbitration eligible players we've got in our organization. Got some good thoughts in response to the last episode from Avery Shaham on the debate between Luis Godina and Darnell Selvey. Avery's thought was that we are potentially a little weaker in the outfield next year, particularly if we move on from the likes of Bobby Armstrong, Luis Aguilar, possibly some others. And we've got a little more depth coming up through the organization in the infield, where Godina would be a more palatable name to move on from. And at a high level, I think that's a astute observation from Avery. I tend to agree with that we're probably a little weaker in the outfield next year than the infield, which could encourage us to bring back Selvey rather than Godina. To me, the pros for Selvey are that he is set to make about $3.5 million less than Godina, so he's cheaper. Outfield is a bigger need for us, and he's a more than competent defensive left fielder. Over the course of Selvey's career, he's put up an outstanding 143 WRC plus, and as we'll see when we go through these three players, over 162 games, he's put up an average of a 6 WAR for us, and that number is very consistent among both Selvey, Godina, and Iwata, for that matter. Negative for Selvey, doesn't really bring anything positive into the clubhouse in terms of his personality, and I think that the position that he's most capable of playing, left field, is certainly not the most valuable defensive position out there. Godina, taking a look at his batting stats, with a 156 WRC plus, is clearly the superior offensive player, although they're both excellent. Interestingly, his average WAR over 162 games is exactly 6.0, just like Selvey. Godina is best defensively at first base, but can play a competent second base. So although we do have more depth in the infield right now, I give Godina some points for playing more valuable positions, particularly if he doesn't end up at first base next year. And he does have that spark plug personality, and the high work ethic is a good influence in the clubhouse for Godina. And last of the three is Chisin Iwata, probably the most valuable defensive player among the three with his ratings and the fact that he can play a more than competent second, short, and even third if we ever needed him there. Iwata, over the course of his career with a 123 WRC plus, is the least productive of these three guys offensively, although given his value as a defender, once again, exactly a 6.0 WAR over 162 games. So we are really looking at, when all is said and done, very similar players in terms of the value. Iwata does definitely bring a different dimension with his speed. Not that the other guys aren't effective on the base paths as well, but Iwata coming off a year when he stole 48 bases and with an on-base percentage close to 400, leading the league in runs scored, is a pretty prototypical leadoff hitter. And Iwata, also a pretty positive influence in the clubhouse with high leadership and work ethic, although he does have low loyalty. So it's going to be a real interesting decision. There's clearly no way to bring all three of those players back. The big debate for me, and we looked at some of the trade options for these players in the last episode, is whether we only bring one back or whether we try to bring two of them back and perhaps move on from guys like Macho Rangel, Bobby Armstrong, Ernesto Comunez, Wilson Rangel, Phil Swenson, Jesus Aguilar, to potentially free up enough money to, I don't want to say right size our payroll, because I think the payroll is going to ultimately be pretty ambitious next year for our overall budget. But I think we can get it to a level that works for us, particularly if we get a little money back in some of these trades, which I have a feeling we probably can do. The other thing that Avery Shaham suggested checking in on, which was a good suggestion, was whether or not we could make an offer to Jonathan Shearer, who is looking for about $16 million a year for 4 years. Avery suggested offering him 1 year, $20 million, which we did do. Unfortunately, he will accept that, and we can't afford to put that on board. So it was a good thought by Avery, although when I thought about it more, because Scherer was on our team, we had traded him away last offseason and then traded back for him the middle of this year. He's actually not available or eligible for draft pick compensation anyways, but it was still a good thought to look into that. But unfortunately, it looks like if we had made a $18.9 million 1 year offer to Scherer, the fact that he was very eager to accept a $20 million offer from us would indicate that he probably would have accepted a qualifying offer to bring him back. So no harm, no foul. We're not going to make that offer to Shearer, but have some interesting decisions still to make. You can see we have made arbitration offers to a number of our players. A lot of the guys that I've just talked about that we could be moving on from this offseason. Actually, I think I've talked about all these guys in the last few minutes. Wilson Rangel, Luis Godina, Chisin Iwata, Phil Swenson, Darnell Selvey, and Jesus Aguilar, who I may have called Luis Aguilar, I realize. All guys that we're deciding whether or not we want to trade away or make offers to some of them. My hunch is probably 2 or 3 of those guys will be back with us next year. My hunch would be 3 or 4 will be traded away or non-tendered. It's just a matter of kind of looking at all of the different options and looking at the rest of the roster and figuring out who we might want to bring back and who it is time to move on from. And clearly with the 3 guys making over $20 million a year, and then even Aguilar at $2.4 million, Swenson at $3 million, and Rangel at $4.9 million, there are some opportunities for us to cut some fat out of this payroll in the coming days. So now that we've shared our latest thoughts on some of the roster decisions we'll have in front of us, time to move on to look at some of the top prospects in baseball that, for whatever reason, haven't ended up in our organization over the years, in some cases over the strenuous objections of members of the worldwide scouting department. We'll take a look at batters first, although Kurt Hall is a potential two-way player. Warrior Hall with the Texas Rangers was a second-round pick for them 6 years ago in the draft. 10-10 record with a 4.95 earned run average on the mound for Texas this year. And as a batter, hit .267, 17 homers, 54 ribbies, put up a 107 WRC plus. So almost a 3 WAR as a position player. And again, back to the pitching stats, another 1.5 plus WAR as a pitcher. So Hall at 24 years old, turning into a very useful major league player, albeit not a superstar, but having a guy who can be above replacement level, well above replacement level, as both a pitcher and a hitter, and in his case also as a pretty solid defensive infielder, is definitely a valuable resource to have, and Warrior Hall has worked out well for the Rangers. Alexis Campos, right fielder with a mixed personality, thought he could be a really interesting contact hitter. Did finally make his major league debut with Tampa Bay this year. Hit over 300 in AAA, but only 244 at the major league level. Was 15 of 16 attempting to steal, and with 11 doubles and 4 triples and 266 at-bats, does have the opportunity to generate some extra base hits. However, the on-base percentage, not good given his really poor eye. Walked an insane 2 times despite having 266 at-bats. So when all was said and done, was basically a replacement level player, as his good speed and his good defense, at least initially, were unable to offset poor batting average and a brutal ability to get on base for Smooth Campos. These next 2 guys, probably the last time that we'll look at them. Juan Monceve, a guy we talked about in the draft a few years ago. He's now become a minor league free agent. We're very intrigued by his glove, but we really thought that he just was not a major league hitter. And honestly, I don't even know if he's a professional hitter at this point. You can see he spent this past year in 6 different organizations, the Atlantic League, 6 different levels of baseball, or different teams across different levels of baseball. Independent ball in the Atlantic League, rookie ball in the ACL, A ball in the California League, high A in the Northwest League, back down to A in the California League, and back up to high A in the Northwest League. His batting averages as the various stops range from 0 to 444. But in the most significant stops in high A ball, he hit 213 and 147 over combined 323 at-bats. So as interesting as his glove is, just not really a major leaguer. Cameron Rhodes, similar situation. He spent this past year in independent ball, did lead the league with 23 triples, only 2 years after he led the majors in Colorado, or at least the National League, with 8 triples. But with a 372 average and 23 triples in independent ball, was very productive there. But he's going to be 27 before the start of next season, and he hasn't played in the majors in 2 years at this point. So Rhodes' career, after a pretty interesting start with a couple of gold gloves, hasn't really gone the way that he would have hoped. Right fielder Jesus Sauceda, little junior brother, a guy whose personality really turned us off. 22 years old, spent the year in high A ball, where he was close to a league average offensive player. Still looks like he might have a little bit of home run pop, but not someone that we're going to lose any sleep over not having selected. Center fielder Juan Villa, recently turned 22 years old, spent this past year in A ball, where he was a slightly above average offensive player. Still, according to our scout, has potential to be a well above average contact hitter who's kind of average at everything else, with good speed, solid outfield range. So he could be a useful major leaguer, but certainly don't expect him to be a superstar. Shortstop Juan Bonilla, an IAFA signing from 3.5 years ago at this point, now the number 47 prospect in baseball, split this year between a couple of rookie league teams in the Miami Marlins organization, and was well above average at both. Another guy who looks like a real good contact hitter, good speed, not a ton of power. Like the personality and like the defense for Racehorse Bonilla. Still think the switch hitter could be a useful major league infielder down the line. Also 20 years old, Adalberto Bacias, another IAFA signing from 2041, spent the entire year in rookie ball for the Pirates, where he put up a 151 WRC plus. Durable, competent-ish infielder who looks like he could be a useful major league bat if he fully develops to his 60 contact and 60 power ceilings that our scout thinks he has. Last two are more recent guys that we moved in different directions then. Jeremy Bennett, potential two-way player who we thought was intriguing. We're hoping he might fall to us with our second round pick in this last draft. Unfortunately, he did not. Longtime member of the worldwide scouting department, not my four-ply, was perhaps the biggest proponent of Bennett. Taking a look at what he actually did, he did not actually play for the Cleveland organization this year, which is unfortunate. Signed with them right before the deadline, so that was poorly played by the Guardians, in my opinion, given that the bonus of $1.5 million, although perhaps a little bit above slot for a guy in the middle of the second round, was certainly not excessive. So we didn't get an opportunity to see what Bennett could do on the field last year. Still think hitting-wise he could be very interesting. Pitching-wise, a little more borderline in my opinion, but certainly seems like he could be a useful guy to have in the organization. I don't think, as I think about Bennett, that he'll ultimately be quite as good as Kurt Hall, but certainly has potential to be. And last but not least, Juan Aroña, number 66 prospect in baseball. He was a guy we thought long and hard about pursuing in the IAFA pool earlier this year. Played in a couple different levels of rookie ball, and as often happens with someone who's 16 and 17 years old over the course of those seasons, was not particularly productive. And moving on to some of the pitching prospects, as those of you who have followed me over the years know, I love pitchers, so I usually end up drafting them or signing them. So outside of Hall and Bennett, the two-way guys we've already talked about, only one other guy on this list, the 24-year-old Kazuki Asare, who was an international free agent 6 years ago at this point. An established major leaguer now, although he had a rough year this season, tore his UCL in late May, missed the rest of the season, still going to be out another 4 months, so hopefully we'll be back in the early stages of spring training for Detroit. He was an all-star for the Tigers a year ago, but this year, much rougher, a 5.56 ERA in just 22 and two-thirds innings pitched before he got hurt, and also allowed 5 homers and walked 14 in that very small sample size. So a very rough year for six-pack Asari after an outstanding rookie season in the majors a year ago. Turning to some of our former players and some of the top pitchers in baseball that we've been following over the years, Chase Dora, our longtime number 2 starter, who was a member of 3 World Championship teams with us, signed a big contract with the Dodgers and has unfortunately at this point moved into a bullpen role with them. He was solid with a 3.76 ERA for them in 52 and two-thirds innings in 25 games this year, but missed most of the second half of the season, or pretty much all of the post-All-Star break second half of the season with a torn back muscle, and $23 million for a reliever who puts up an ERA of close to 4 over 52 and two-thirds innings. Certainly only something that the Dodgers or perhaps the Yankees, Mets, Red Sox, Cubs, teams like that can afford. Mike Gallick, former starter for us in a couple of different stints over the years, was both a starter and a reliever for the Mets this year. Overall, a 6-2 record with a 3.76 ERA over 127 innings pitched. good solid major leaguer, but at $14.3 million, probably too rich for us. Steve Genis, who won 7 consecutive Cy Young Awards for the Rangers previously, hasn't won one in 3 years at this point, with our ace, Mr. Arriola, having won the last 3 American League Cy Young Awards. 11-10 with a 3.82 ERA, did put up a 5.7 WAR, struck out almost a batter per inning for Texas once again. The 34-year-old at this point topped 200 career wins and 100 career losses coincidentally this year, closing in on his 3,000th strikeout. His ERA over the last few years has drifted to just over 3, but with an 83.5 career WAR as a pitcher. And those 7 Cy Young Awards that we mentioned, 9 heads Genis, clearly is a future Hall of Famer. Andy Grimes, only 28 years old, certainly a potential future Hall of Famer. 16-7 with a 2.92 ERA and 210 strikeouts for the Nationals this year. Nice bounce back year for him after an injury-plagued 2043. The 28-year-old is already a 3-time Cy Young Award winner and a 6-time All-Star, even though he's only 28 years old. Chuck Huntley was our closer for several years, priced himself out of our organization, and split. Actually didn't split. He didn't pitch at all with the Mets this year. Spent the whole year at AAA Syracuse, where he was pretty brutal with an ERA of over 6. So $2.3 million is less than he was making when we finally had to move on from him, but definitely overpaid for what he ended up delivering to the New York Mets organization this year. Joe Lewin, we traded him away many years, was a solid starter for a few seasons, now a lefty working out of the bullpen for the Dodgers, had a respectable year with a WAR of 0.7 for the National League Western Division champions. Mike Ramsey, the brilliant two-way player, 11-6 with a 2.82 ERA this year for the Dodgers. He is set to potentially become a free agent, not that we would likely be able to afford Sirique, who at this point has 4 Cy Young Awards and 7 Most Valuable Player Awards on his way to a Hall of Fame career, in addition to the very solid pitching season he had with a 6.7 WAR when all was said and done. Ramsey remains an outstanding offensive player, put up a 130 WRC plus and another 5 WAR as a batter, or more accurately as a position player. 34 homers and 93 ribbies for perhaps the most well-rounded two-way player and most accomplished two-way player in Major League history. Andres Rojas, the old knuckleballer, 10-9 with a 3.44 ERA for the Mets this year. Still has a very useful profile as a pitcher, although he did miss the playoffs with a sore shoulder that still giving him a little bit of trouble. And last but not least, our former ace, Jesus Saldana, who we traded away a couple of years ago. He's become, as we expected, a bullpen arm for the Rockies, given the massive loss in stamina he had following some serious injuries. 2.17 ERA for Trey Saldana in 37 1/3 innings pitched. So he was effective, very effective when he was on the mound with a sub-1 whip, 2.17 ERA plus and a 75 FIP minus. But given that he pitched only 30 games out of the bullpen, my assumption is he spent some time on the IL this past year. Definitely had a lot of issues. Most significant was 2 months with elbow inflammation that looks like it shut him down for the season in mid-August. And a few more established players, many of whom came through our organization that we'd like to talk about. Already talked about the brilliant two-way player Mike Ramsey. Catcher Jorge Mendoza, injury-plagued season for him. hit just 210 with 2 homers and 224 at-bats for Minnesota. Still has a pretty good profile, both offensively and defensively, for a catcher who will be 33 years old next year. But certainly think that we moved on from him at the right time. And fortunately, with Jonah Richards, we had a brilliant replacement in our organization. Amari Alcindor, a guy who we gave many opportunities to over the years, has been basically a league average offensive player since he joined the Rockies. 22 homers and 69 ribbies this year. All the batting average was just 241. I'm assuming that 3.4 WAR is the highest of his career. Yeah, definitely by far the highest. So he's been useful to the Rockies, but certainly probably also benefits from playing in that park as far as some of the home run numbers he's put up. Second baseman Gilberto Alvarado, 229 average, 15 homers, 57 ribbies for the Nationals, for the Cubs this year. For the Nationals. I was reading last year since I'm not good at scrolling down. Hit 285 with 14 homers and 55 ribbies for the Nationals this year. So a pretty productive season with a 133 WRC plus in the 260 at-bats that he did have. Our former catcher, Byron Brain, the king of the strikeout, struck out 89 times in 168 at-bats this year for the Braves. Seems to have settled in as a very competent defensive backup catcher. Was close to league average this year with 8 homers and 26 ribbies in those 168 at-bats. So despite all the strikeouts, was a representative offensive player, and given his good defense, that allowed him to put up a 1.2 WAR. Alejandro Landin, our longtime second baseman and shortstop, is wrecked physically at this point, playing with our division rival in Texas after he was with our division rival in the Angels a year ago. 244, 13 homers, and 52 ribbies. So a 93 WRC plus and just about a win above replacement. Still a useful major league player, but he's wrecked physically and has no speed. So Flea Landin, the switch hitting infielder, likely in the final stages of his major league career. You may remember last year in the offseason we had an opportunity when the international free agents were announced to look at the dual English/Scottish Finley Tatnell. The Yankees end up signing him, and he spent the entire year in AAA Scranton, where he hit 238 with 34 homers, 83 ribbies. Well above average offensive player. I don't know if 11% above average is well above average, but an above average offensive player in AAA. But at 32 years old, presumably he would have been hoping to be in the major leagues. And last, but certainly not least, the franchise Jake Ortega. We talked about him a lot through this season as he was constantly showing up in our feed, since we do have him on the short list as suffering from many different injuries. And when this season was all said and done, played in just 29 games. Very productive with a 152 WRC plus, but only 103 at-bats for Mr. Ortega. He'll be 37 years old next season, likely headed to free agency once again, wrecked physically, coming off of 3 consecutive years where he has not played more than 33 games in the major leagues. And at this point, although he did have a Rookie of the Year, 2 MVP awards with us, it's hard for me to think that this 2-time MVP award winner is going to end up in the Hall of Fame. Unlikely to get to 2,000 career hits, unlikely to even reach 1,000 ribbies. Probably will get to 200 homers, and could get to 400 steals because that part of his game still seems pretty solid. But the batting average has dipped below 300. And the WAR for his career is 58.8 at this point, but just don't think he's going to have done well enough in some of the accumulation and counting statistics to be a serious Hall of Fame candidate when the franchise's career is complete. And for me, at least, even more interesting than prospects on other teams and players that we've moved on from are the players who could be a significant part of our future in this Oakland Athletics organization. And as we sit here at the end of the 2044 season, we have the number one ranked farm system in all of baseball. So as we start trying to think about what we may want to do in the trade market, free agency, arbitration, etc. this offseason, refreshing ourselves on who is close in our organization and might be able to fill some of the gaps is a useful exercise, particularly as we debate between the first base / second baseman, Mr. Godina, the second baseman / shortstop, Mr. Iwata, and the left fielder, Mr. Selvey, whether one or two of those players will be back with us next year. A more fulsome review of who's actually coming up and potentially can help us next year in our farm system is something to think about. As I mentioned, the top farm system in baseball and the top prospect in our organization is the guy that we focused on as our international free agent signing this past January, Nelson Ramirez, the governor, still at our international complex, but he is viewed as the number 10 prospect in baseball. Likely we'll see him in the DSL next year. Looks like right now he can borderline hold his own in the DSL, but he'll be 18 years old by the time we're getting out of spring training, and few months older than that by the time the DSL gets underway, so hopefully he'll be a little further developed and able to compete this year. Certainly not someone who's going to be helping us anytime soon, however. A guy who's a little closer is Edgar Alarcon. Picked him up in a trade with San Diego a couple years ago, and he has developed into the number 12 prospect in baseball. That was a trade where we sent a big crew of prospects: Greg Sockwell, catcher Amari Cephas, reliever Mike Robbins, and first baseman Brandon Coakley, who still looks like he's got pretty high potential, but a long way to go to pick up the pitcher Alarcon. And Alarcon has really developed a lot since we picked him up. Added a mile an hour to his velocity, and we certainly have seen some pretty significant development and improvement, both in terms of his current ratings and in some cases in terms of his potential. So Alarcon made it up to Double-A this year, started in Single-A where he was 4-0, went 7-3 in High-A, and then 4-1 with a 2.19 ERA in Double-A. Looks like a guy who most likely will be starting next year in AAA, but certainly could be competing for a spot in our rotation in the not-too-distant future. Don't view him as a star, but looks like a very solid third or fourth starter, maybe even a number 2 if he reaches his full potential. Gabe Kimball, ranked the number 15 prospect in baseball, a guy we picked with our first-round pick back in 2041. Split the year between A and high A ball. Had a monster season in A ball, 172 WRC plus and 258 at-bats. Struggled a bit when he got up to high A ball, hitting just below 200. But still did have 6 doubles, 3 triples, 5 homers. So a little bit of extra base pop in that bat in the 211 at-bats he did have at the higher level. Still think he's got a versatile glove that can play competently just about anywhere in the infield, and a bat that could be very interesting for a middle infielder if he continues to develop. Juan Moreno is likely penciled in as our starting shortstop next year, even though he does not have any major league regular season experience. We did bring him up to the playoff roster when Luis Godina had an injury during the playoffs, And given Moreno's outstanding defense, we actually let him play it short for us for a few games. Split this year between AA and AAA was well above average offensively at both levels and combined for a 7 WAR. Certainly the ability to put Moreno into the lineup at shortstop means that if we decide to bring Chisa Iwata back, he will move over to second base, which is a much more natural defensive position for him to be playing. Another guy who made his major league debut late this year, Mike Mercer, actually did play a bit in the regular season, was not particularly good with a 7.27 ERA in 8 2/3 innings, but the number 38 prospect in baseball did strike out 14.5 batters per 9 in that small sample size in the majors. Throws close to 100 miles an hour, outstanding fastball, a good sinker, and a cutter that he's still working on. He will certainly be in the mix for a bullpen spot next year. Number 41 prospect in baseball, the right fielder Arturo Anguino, IAFA signing from 2042, was dominant in rookie ball this year. We promoted him at 19 years old up to single A. He wasn't a complete disaster. The 185 batting average would certainly lead you to think that maybe he was. But he did draw 22 walks to put his on-base percentage up over 300. Overall had an 85 WRC plus. So he certainly wasn't good, but he was also only 19 years old in A-ball. Would expect more from him at that level next year. And perhaps as a 20-year-old, he'll move up to high A before the end of the year. Another guy who's a bit closer to being able to help us is the IAFA signing from way back in 2038, Jacoby Manelli, the number 52 prospect in baseball now. Split the year between high A and double A. Was pretty productive at both levels. Batting averages in the 270 to 280 range with a little bit of pop in his bat at both levels. Honestly, when we brought Manelli on board, his ceiling, we thought, was potentially higher than what he's actually become. But he still is a guy that ultimately looks like he could be above average in just about everything offensively. So a potential DH or first baseman for us not too far down the line. Another guy who's very close to helping us is Devin Carrick. This is a guy that we're thinking strongly about if we do decide to move on from both Darnell Selvey and somebody like Bobby Armstrong. That could open up an opportunity for the 25-year-old Carrick to finally get a real opportunity in the majors. He was up late last year, and he hit .333 in 12 at-bats. But this past year, 2044, spent the whole year in AAA, where he batted .305, 25 homers, 90 ribbies. Not a lot left for him to prove down there. Certainly doesn't have an exceptional glove even for a left fielder, but he can be a functional defensive left fielder, and that left-handed bat of Carrick's we think could be very interesting, particularly against right-handed pitching. So could certainly see Carrick competing for a platoon role in the outfield next year, especially if some combination of Selvey, Armstrong, and Aguilar are no longer with us next season. 3 more top 100 prospects to talk about. Tawase Zuabri, IAFA signing from 2040, split the year between A and high A ball, and was a well above average offensive player at both levels. Not too far off being major league quality. Would expect that the soon-to-be 22-year-old will be starting next year in Double A. Don't have any glaring needs at catcher with Richards and Covarrubias on the roster. But one other thing that we're thinking about in the back of our mind as far as the catcher position is, do we move Jonah Richards to first base or DH to get that bat in the lineup more often? As good as he is defensively at catcher, Covarrubias is even better, and we did make the trade last offseason for Mr. Mabe, who could certainly play catcher at the major league level too. So if we end up moving on from 2 out of 3 in the Godina, Selvey, and Iwata list, and if one of the ones we move on from is the first baseman Godina, not inconceivable that maybe we pivot Richards to first base or DH, which could provide a better glide path over the next year or two for Zouabri to be contributing in the majors. Clarindo Moreno, an IAFA signing from 2041, split the year between single A, high A, and double A, was a combined 13 and 7 at those levels, although the 20-year-old definitely struggled in double A with a 5.61 ERA and 4 starts at the end of the year. But he really had nothing left to prove in high A ball. I think that the left-hander could be a more than competent back of the rotation guy for us in the not too distant future. And our final top 100 prospect, another IAFA guy, Vasco Espreguera, our IAFA signing from 2041, had a decent season in rookie ball with an 87 WRC plus. Still think that the home run power and decent gap power and a decent eye combined with excellent home run power is attractive about Espreguera. But we do have to be realistic. He's going to be turning 21 years old soon, and he hasn't been all that impactful even in rookie ball. Likely we'll have to promote him to single A next year and just give him a trial by fire. Unlikely given the potential time frame we have left with these A's, which likely ranges from 0 seasons to maybe 3 or 4 seasons if we decide to transfer these A's over to the early stages of OOTP 26. Would not expect that we will ever see Espreguera at the major league level. We also have several prospects ranked between 101st and 200th. D'Anthony Bramblett, one of the ones who could help us next year, particularly at first base if we move on from Mr. Godina. Hit 309 with 46 doubles, 10 triples, and 16 homers in AAA this year. Not a lot for him to prove at that level. The 6'4 Bramblett is a pretty solid defensive first baseman. Doesn't really bring much anywhere else. I think he could be a very useful bat against left-handed pitching, though. Not really ideal power for a first base DH type against right-handed pitching, but still a respectable contact hitter. Ricky Tobin, ranked one notch behind him at number 105, was our first-round pick back in 2043. 1-9 this year with a 4.61 ERA in rookie ball for the 19-year-old. Was above replacement level. Still think that Tobin could ultimately develop into a useful pitcher for us. Hopefully he'll be ready for A-ball at some time next year. John Bramlett, this is a guy we haven't talked about in a while. He's had some horrible injury issues. First-round pick from 2040. But you can see he has not played over the last 2 years. He was 9-3 with a 3.39 ERA in high A ball in 2042, and unfortunately, it's been a devastating injury situation for him. 24 months recovering from that torn UCL, so he is now finally healthy, but it's been literally over 2 years at this point since he has stepped on a professional mound. Still think, based on what our scout says, that he could be a useful fifth starter at the major league level, but obviously we only have low scouting accuracy on him since he hasn't pitched in years at this point. Kadir Noyle, center fielder, spent this last year with AAA, 268 average, did have 42 home runs and 111 ribbies, but when all was said and done was barely a league average offensive player in the PCL. Like the glove, like the speed, the bat, he can hit some home runs, but other than that, it's certainly not exceptional. Another guy who, depending on how many of our more expensive major league outfielders we move on from this offseason, could have an opportunity to help us in the not-too-distant future. Closer Josh Keel, 9th-round pick in 2042, split the year between rookie ball A and high A, and was very effective at all 3 levels. No question about his stuff. It's just a matter of the movement and the control. Still think he's got potential to be a competent major leaguer in those categories. And if he continues with that incredible fastball and outstanding sinker, he could be a useful reliever for us in future years. Catcher Kevin Bryan, ranked number 133, first-round pick from 2042. Started the year in rookie ball where he was very productive offensively, and he was an above-average offensive player when we promoted him up to A-ball. More of a potential bat at catcher. Think the glove is just slightly above average, but still holding out hopes that the youngster will develop into a useful player for us at the major league level. Second baseman Mel Wack, second-round pick from 2042, also split the year between rookie ball and A-ball, and kind of the opposite of Kevin Bryan. He was pretty average in rookie ball, and then he absolutely excelled offensively when we promoted him up to A. Hit .302 with 15 homers and 182 at-bats. Love some of the personality traits. A competent defensive infielder who we think could have a pretty interesting bat down the line. Final two guys we'll talk about are both guys who are in the mix to help us in the outfield next year. Jeremy Wright was up briefly this season and was effective with a 105 WRC plus and 19 at-bats. Had a very good year in AAA, 277 average, 33 doubles, 11 triples, 24 homers, 116 WRC plus, and a 3 WAR overall. Wright isn't a guy who's going to draw a lot of walks, but we think he's kind of above average at everything else offensively. Respectable defensive player. The former first-round pick. Probably not going to be a superstar, but as a platoon guy or a fourth outfielder, I think there's definitely potential for Wright to help us next year. And similarly, the center fielder Ben Prince, he came up and started this past year in Double-A, quickly moved on to Triple-A, played in Oakland in September, and then took over as our starting center fielder in the playoffs, and all he did was win an ALDS MVP award while helping us to a World Series championship and hit over 400 over the 14 playoff games that we had. So Prince is certainly penciled in as our starting center fielder next year. We have Arturo Uresti, who is written in blood as our starting right fielder next year. So even if we are to move on from some combination of Selvey, Armstrong, and Ramirez, we really just kind of have left field and utility outfielder spots left. And our thought is with Jeremy Wright, Kadir Noyle, Devin Carrick, all in the mix. If all three of those guys end up in the majors, then conceivably we could move on from Selvey, Armstrong, and Aguiar. But even if we only move on from one or two of them, should open up a spot for some of these younger outfielders. So I do think that ultimately we are a little weaker at outfield than infield, but I think there are enough major league ready guys in the mix that if we decided moving on from Darnell Selvey was the way we wanted to go, it would be a defensible decision for us. And those are the kinds of decisions that we are going to be thinking about between now and the next episode. We've reviewed our farm system. We've checked in on some old friends. Last episode, we reviewed our major league roster and started planning for the offseason. So now it's just a matter of what we are actually going to do between now and the next episode. Going to be giving some serious thought to a lot of different trades for major leaguers, for prospects, to get some money off of the books, but also hopefully ultimately make our major league team as competitive as it can be for the 2045 season. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.